Right, so Iran has struck back at Israel over its attack on them on Saturday with a war of words and smack talk, as I covered in another video the other day. But now has taken the US on directly too. A strike on them that is absolutely genius, because it puts the Biden administration between a rock and a hard place, just where, frankly, it deserves to be. You see, instead of just laying out some smack talk on the US as well, Iran have instead gone to the United Nations. But not only that, whilst the US has warned Iran not to strike back following Israel's latest act of aggression, and whilst our wet wipe of a UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said likewise, Iran have said, OK, fine, we won't strike back, as long as Israel get out of Gaza and get out of Lebanon. Bring an end to the atrocity and we won't strike you back. An offer on the table for Israel's Western backers to obviously refuse. But then that'll be on them. That'll reflect on them. Plus trouble brewing thanks to Iran making demands of the UN to intervene as well, done in a manner to bring maximum shame down on the United States. They're boxing rather cleverly, and boxing in shameless politicians in the Middle East and the West at the same time. Like I said, it's genius. Right, so how to put the US and Israel in a bind and use every weapon at your disposal under international law to do it. Well, after handing Israel its backside verbally following its weaker than a cup of microwaved tea latest insult on Iran, very much not self-defense but an act of aggression as that was, following 2 attacks on Iran previously that prompted rocket-fired retaliation in turn, Iran have this time not gone for third time's a charm quite yet. They're biding their time. They bided it last time, making Israel worry themselves silly about when and what scale the response from Iran would take, and they are arguably doing again the same thing this time as well. But the difference this time is that instead of going to wait and see, we're going to strike back when we're good and ready, they've taken a diplomatic approach. They've now said, here's a deal on the table for you. And really this is just a reiteration of what the entire Arab world involved in action with Israel over their genocide in Gaza have been saying, have been asking for, be it Hezbollah or the Houthis or Islamic resistance in Iraq, and that is to end the siege in Gaza. Iran have publicly stated to Israel following their latest attack on Iran, targeting military sites this time only, proving they can stick to military targets and they don't have to hit civilian areas. A reminder, as if we needed it, that their choice to target civilian areas is therefore a conscious choice that they have therefore been making, that all they actually need to do to avoid another rocket attack from Iran, that they will have once again brought on themselves, is for Israel to just get out of Gaza and get out of Lebanon. The Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories has already been deemed illegal by the International Court of Justice in an advisory capacity, but that should still carry the necessary weight in my view. Why should it have to require more hoops to jump through just to make it legally binding? As if the decision is not already a matter of fact and academic, and they've invaded another sovereign country in Lebanon in direct violation of a UN resolution, 1701, which expressly forbids Israel from crossing into Lebanon, but which the same US and Israel who struck Iran is trying to get rewritten, the US lead negotiator, if you can call him such a thing, being a literal Israeli citizen himself, working for the Biden administration, a former IDF tank crewman, tank crews not faring well in Lebanon, as I've mentioned in other content. Hezbollah very much having the number on Israel's Merkava tanks, having murked some 28 of them at last count in just a month. But it does just go to show how closely the US Biden administration is with Israel when he has literal Israelis working in it. If the US and Israel are so keen on de-escalation as Western mainstream media keep trying to imply that they are, then why wouldn't they take such a deal? Well, of course they're not going to take it. A US deal with Israel is seeing CIA-trained mercenaries preparing to be the prison guards of the next generation of Gazan concentration camps, and the deal being presented by that Israeli negotiator acting on behalf of the US and Israel, Amos Hochstein, is demanding Lebanon cede territory and their sovereignty to Israel as a prerequisite of any peace. In my view, with all of this considered and all of these stories having been covered by this channel in recent days, there is no honest peace brokership here. There is none to be had with direct involvement of the US or its proxy, which is frankly all Israel is. For as much as our media love to talk of Iran's proxies, Israel is literally a US one. They won't let it fail, but equally they won't put it back in its box when in the name of peace, that is exactly what has to happen. Otherwise further escalation across the Middle East is basically assured. So Iran have put that offer to Israel and the US anyway, knowing, as I'm sure they do, that it won't be taken up. But they haven't left things there. There's more, and this is where the stroke of genius comes in. Here's an excerpt from the Cradle laying it out. Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called on the UN on the 27th of October to convene an urgent Security Council meeting in response to Israel's recent missile and drone attack on the Islamic Republic, while affirming Iran's right to retaliate. Araghchi issued a letter to the UN Secretary-General stating that the Islamic Republic of Iran calls on the President of the Security Council to convene an urgent meeting to address these serious violations and illegal actions, ensuring that this regime is held accountable for its actions. While Iran's air defense system intercepted most of the missiles, 4 Iranian army officers bravely sacrificed their lives to protect the national security of their country and were martyred, Araghchi's letter stated. In the early hours of 26th of October, Israel launched a missile and drone attack on Iranian military sites in the provinces of Tehran, Khuzestan and Alam, killing 4 Iranian soldiers. The minister emphasized that the Islamic Republic reserves the right to duly respond to this aggression, which cannot be separated from Israel's genocide in Gaza and bloodshed in Lebanon. The world must unite against this common threat to international peace and security. Well, that all sounds horribly reasonable, doesn't it? Bucks the trend of the narratives we keep getting spoon-fed about Iran as far as the beef between them and Israel builds. I have to say, until I read this Cradle article, I was still only aware of 2 deaths, not realising that had risen to 4, but it's only by reading excellent sources of alternative media covering these events impartially that you get to know and hear of such things. I can't emphasise enough how valuable an outlet the Cradle is on what is happening in the Middle East. Now that emergency meeting request by Iran of the UN Security Council has been made, it's been supported over the weekend by Algeria, China and Russia, and it puts the US and the UK, frankly, after Keir Starmer's abominable demand that Iran not respond and that Israel, despite being the attacker and the perpetrator, has a right to defend itself, because obviously both of those nations are permanent UN Security Council members, with Algeria being on the UNSC until 2025, China and Russia incidentally also permanent members. But that meeting is happening today, but has not been resolved at the time of writing. What we have also learned, though, is that since this request was made by Iran, a complaint has also been submitted by Iraq over the weekend, complaining of the use of Iraq's airspace by Israel in order to attack Iran. This has dropped Israel and the US especially in a huge pile of doo-doo, because in Iraq, following 2 massive wars over there for the past 30 years, you might have heard of them, the Gulf War and the Iraq War, there are a large number of US military bases and installations still scattered across Iraq and neighbouring states as well. On October the 10th, the Islamic resistance in Iraq warned in a statement to Israel and the US that the use of Iraqi airspace to target Iran will be met with strikes on Israel, but also on all US bases, camps and interests in the region. Well, of course that has now happened now, hasn't it? And so the attacks on US bases have begun too. Islamic resistance are currently engaging in attacking US bases in Syria, just over the Iraqi border, as well as strikes on Israel. They started responding last night with the Al-Tanf US base targeted by drones twice, and the Al-Omar US base, sited in Syria's largest oil field, with rockets. That'll go down well. Not being able to use Iraqi airspace would present Israel with a logistical problem where it comes to striking Iran. Diplomatic ties between the US and Iraq are strained already. Iraq is tired of the US presence still there. They'd be unlikely, I imagine, to stop Islamic resistance hitting those bases, therefore, within their own country, but who knows how that would play out. We'll have to wait and see, I guess. I presume it's going to end up coming now. But frankly, diplomatic ties between the US and anyone but Israel seem to be less important to them anyway. Now the US have to face Iran and the actions they were party to at the UN Security Council, who are demanding of that Security Council that they address the illegal actions and serious violations that have just been committed by Israel, as well as state their affirmation, the Security Council's affirmation, that the state of Iran, as a UN sovereign member state, has a right to defend itself and retaliate by way of self-defense should they now choose to. They are frankly staring the US and the UK in the face and daring them to vote against them having the right to self-defense before the eyes of the world, as well as daring them, despite the unprovoked nature of Israel's latest attack, all of them having been unprovoked, but this one they're desperately trying to sell as self-defense even if it wasn't. Where Western media will undoubtedly spin this all for all they are worth, most of the rest of the world will see the truth of however this situation unfolds and how the UNSC reacts accordingly. Either the US chucks their precious proxy under the bus, or they deny another sovereign state the right of self-defense by still trying to sell a lie of Iran's aggression having been the instigating factor. I shall watch this with interest to see how this emergency meeting ends up being resolved. But where Iran are firing back at the US today, in large part at that UN Security Council meeting, they've already had a crack at Israel. though very much in a verbal fashion, following that recent rocket attack. Because as much as it is a very serious matter to attack another nation, and as much as there is absolutely nothing funny that 4 Iranian soldiers lost their lives in this attack, Iran's smack talk at Israel following what they saw overall as a very weak attack, Israel possibly unable to afford much more than a show that they put on, has certainly meant Israel have gained nothing by it, but have, if anything, lost even more face in the eyes of the world following this latest airstrike, which most of the world sees for what it is, completely unprovoked. That they're just trying to keep this Middle Eastern expansion of their aggression going. Get all the details of that story in this video recommendation here, though, as your suggested next watch, and I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.